Okay, today we're going to be showing you how to take off a tank and more importantly get all the parts out of a tank, out of Crown Victorias that are both police interceptor and non-police interceptor. So this is 01 through 11 Crown Victoria police interceptors, some 01 to 03 town cars, and then regular Crown Victorias 01 to 11. There's two different tanks that can go on this. The aftermarket part number is F42D and F42E. So the difference in them, the police interceptor one is the 42E, and where this valve goes in, there's no notch. The D has a notch for the valve. It's surprising how many times the book will call for the non-police interceptor tank, the 42D, and it ends up being the police interceptor tank on there with no notch. And you'll have a Crown Victoria on the hoist that has no indication of being a police interceptor, and it'll have this police interceptor tank on it. So first thing you got to deal with is using a fuel line disconnect tool like this. You got to disconnect the stainless fuel line going into that. Now that's all stainless, and the flex line is stainless. The problem that you have is the little lock that they had in there was mild steel, and a lot of times that lock will be rusted off inside there. So before you can get your tool in there to release that, you got to dig out all that old lock that may be rusted off inside there. So I just disconnect the fuel line first, and then this wiring harness ends up above in a little cubby hole, and it's wire tied onto the fuel line in one other place, and you got to get those wire ties cut so you can get that out and get it unplugged. The other thing you got to watch out for when you're taking these off is on the passenger side up in the wheel well, there's a quick connect right there. That has to be obviously taken apart before you take the tank down. It's attached to a little short piece of hose, and it has a giant horseshoe clip on it. Ideally, you're supposed to just push the button on it. It's supposed to release. A lot of times you end up breaking that clip and stuff and have to replace that. I get this all loose from the tank before I bring it down, because if you're not careful, you can end up breaking this T-fitting, and it can be a real problem trying to replace that. And you'll notice that the harness for the pressure sensor goes underneath there. You want, when you're putting it back together, you want to make sure that that harness is underneath there, because you need all the room possible when you're going to put that tank back up, and you don't want to end up pinching that line, pinching that harness. The straps, are held in by a stud, and usually the whole stud and everything comes out. This particular one, my speed nuts are also broke, so I'm going to be replacing the speed nuts. Generally, it's nearly impossible to try to take up the slack using this stud. So you're going to want to find a M10 by 1.5 millimeter tap bolt to go into the new speed nut. That way you can push up on it, and it has plenty of slack in it to take up and tighten up the strap. Here is the part number for the speed nuts, and there's our information here at Tank Renu. And I'm going to be replacing the straps on this, so I already got it loose. And the way you got to get these straps out of here is I make a cut right there on the strap, and then I get a screwdriver in there and open that up, and you got to get that pin out through that hole right there. And once I have that pin out, I'll clean it up because it's usually all rusty, And then once I have the tank up in place, I'll put my new strap in there and slide the pin in, and you're good to go. And then with the new speed nuts on there, I'll be using this bolt here to put it back in. So what we're going to do, when I drop this out too, to take out all the screws around the gas cap and bring the whole fill neck down and everything with it. So we're going to go ahead and get the fuel pump out of here, and then I will show you how to get this valve, these two valves out of here without breaking them. You want to be very careful you don't break them, because they do not make them anymore. And the last time I did have to buy one, I had to buy a whole tank from the junkyard to get that valve out. So the first thing I'm going to do is get this fill neck out of here. Then I'll take the fuel pump loose. They need an 8mm socket. Get that out. Put the parts right in my pocket. See, this is pretty much froze on here. So ideally, you're supposed to be able to just pinch these horseshoe clips, and this is the same thing I was talking about on that big one on the passenger side. But usually here in Michigan, things are all rusted together and it don't want to come apart. So what you end up doing is getting these little ears off of here. Just break that out of there, and you end up having to replace that horseshoe clip. But those are available by Dorman and FMSI. You'll see there all the guts came out of the quick connect and stayed on there, so I will have to, since this is just a vent line, you might be able to lube that up and jam it on in there, but since this is Gas Tank Renew and we have new quick connects, I'll just be putting a new hose and quick connect on that. The only thing you got to watch out is if you're putting a new hose on there, that it doesn't end up kinked. So now when we go to take this out, there's a grommet right there that seals that in. And usually what I do is I'll go ahead and put a little grease on that and run that in and out a couple times, kind of lube it up. And there, almost the end of it. Sometimes this little piece on the end will get caught on the grommet and end up in the tank, but when you have the fuel pump out, you can dig that back out and pop that on. Take the grommet out. Again, if it falls on the tank, no big deal. You can dig it out later. And its grommet's in pretty good shape. I'll clean it up and inspect it beforehand, but we will probably be reusing that. Next thing you got to take apart is this fuel pressure sensor. Usually get a small screwdriver in there, get it past the lock. Like I said, that goes underneath that vent line and is attached right there. And we got more 8mm bolts. The new tanks come with new bolt, so I usually don't reuse these. Generally too, if you see all this insulation on the tank, it's a pretty good bet that's a Police Interceptor tank. I think they put these on the ones that were Police Interceptor because there was a lot of accidents with cops getting rear-ended and the car blowing up. Alright, this is typically what you see. A lot of times this strainer is dirty. You can take some brake cleaner and clean that up if you're not going to be replacing the fuel pump, and kind of clean that up with get the crap off of it. Alright, stop. Alright, so we got the fuel pump out of the old tank. We're going to take these two valves out. And again, a lot of times where it's calling for the non-Police Interceptor tank, ends up being a Police Interceptor. So you want to verify that this big valve is actually a push-in valve or a notch valve, and you can look up inside there and see whether it's pushing. You see any notches? You don't see any notches, you know you're dealing with a 42E. If you see notches and you only bought a 42E, F42E, you got the wrong tank. So what I do now is I get some grease and I grease up the underside of these valves right where they go through the grommet, and so that's why once I start to pull that out of there, it's pre-lubed, because these things are in there really tight, and it's easy to break them off if you're not careful. Got that all lubed up. And what I'll do too for good measures, so I'm using a big flat, you use a big flat screwdriver, you want to get it underneath right where that gusset's at, right there, so you have a little bit of support. And I'll even spray a little bit of lube in there. I'm doing the small one first. You don't want to pull on that tube either, you'll break that tube off. Get that loose. Push right up from the bottom then. You do not want to lose this grommet. I don't think they make them anymore. So I'll just go ahead and put that on there right like that for now. Now, get the big one, same thing. Get that pried up just a little bit. Get some more lube on it. Turn. Notice I'm doing all my prying on the little gussets here. Having a second one nearby certainly helps. There you go. Again, get your grommet on there so you don't lose it. And that's how you get those valves out. And so we'll get this installed in the new tank and show you how to do that and get it installed. All right, I got my new gasket on the fuel pump. Comes with a new gasket and these new screws. Clean up the underside of that fuel pump before you go putting the new gasket on. And the new bolts for it, you'll need a 10mm socket. You don't have to have them super tight. It's like a car wheel, kind of go back and forth. I usually do my final tightening with a hand ratchet, so that I have a better feel of how tight I am. Probably about 15 pounds of torque is all you need. You don't want to get them too tight. It can be snapped off, or you flatten out that gasket too much, you'll end up with a leak. Once we have this all together, we do put a little bit of air into the tank and put some soapy water around this and the valves on top. Not very many of them leak. You might get one in 100 that leak, but it's usually pretty foolproof. All right, I'm gonna flip this around here, back in the position that it was in before. Gaskets in there. This black here is from the Ford hose. You touch any of this Ford hose, you end up looking like a coal miner. All your hands end up black and everything else. So again, some grease. We have a saying here at Tank Renu: if you love it, lube it. So things always go back together better if you put a little lube on it. So just the opposite when you took it out. I'm going to put the big one in first. And once again, you got the OBD2 that you're going to run underneath there. I'm going to leave this loose until the tank is in place, because with this being loose, you're less apt to catch this on the frame and then snapping it off. So I leave that loose until I have it all into place, and then I'll snap it in once I have it all strapped in. This here, you need to make sure it actually snaps in. A lot of times that gasket will kind of get swelled up, and you want to make sure that that snaps in, because if that's not plugged in, it'll set off a check engine light and you'll be in trouble. So the roll valve grommet, or the fill neck grommet, is going to go in the same way as those roll valve grommets. Clean it up here, make sure it's not dried up and cracked. These are still available from Ford if you do need them. I would recommend getting them from Ford and not use aftermarket ones. And once again, they are a tight fit. So once you have that in there, you should be able to turn it so you have it all the way around the whole lip. And again, once you put the fill bracket back in, a little grease on that. Alright, so we're going to tighten that up and air test it and then put it back in. Alright, so we got our tank all put together. We got the fill neck back in. Got a new quick connect there. You know, if you can't come up with one of these quick connects, which is 3/8 female by 5/16 male to go on there, you can use a hose on this and just hose it in and clamp it. Another thing we had to do different here today is instead of using this Ford speed nut that I showed you earlier that has to have there's a little slot where this lock goes into on that. One of my slots was gone on this, so there's no way for that to lock in. So plan B, what we do is get in there with a burr and grind it out so we can use a GM speed nut on it. So we'll be using this GM speed nut on it with the 3/8 by 2.5 inch tap bolt to put this up. I got the remnants of all my straps out of here. I showed you where I had cut that. Got the remnants all out. I'm not going to put the straps in there right now until the tank is up there. And then as we put that tank up, once again, we're going to be we're mindful of not catching that tube on the frame and busting it off. Another thing I do with these straps, since you're dealing with all aftermarket stuff, a lot of times it's a little bit easier if you open up that hole on the strap there a little bit, because it's a tight fit up there, and between an aftermarket tank and aftermarket straps, things end up being off just enough to cause problems. So we're going to go ahead and get the tank up, and I'll show you a couple other things and we'll be done. Alright, so we got the tank all in. We got our new clip on that quick connect on the side of the tank. This is what they look like. They only go in one way, so make sure you're putting it in the right way. And on the underside here, tank's all in. We got the vent line coming to the back here to the charcoal canister, and everything's all snapped in on the tank.